Paul Winfree is with the Center for Economic Innovation. Good morning, Paul. How are you?
I'm doing great. Good morning, Hugh.
Good morning. Now, you're too young to remember Lost in Space or Good and Plenty. So I'm not going to throw references at you that are going to confuse you, but you were the deputy director of the Domestic Policy Council in the Trump White House, correct?
That's right.
And now you are AFP, Americans for Prosperity, sponsor of our show, and you're helping them figure out how to translate what the candidates say tonight. Let me introduce this segment by playing for you the Americans for Prosperity ad that they are dropping on the networks today. Let's roll that.
Ronald Reagan used to ask, "Are you better off today than you were before?" Sadly, for most Americans, the answer is no. We know that because at Americans for Prosperity, we talk with them every day.
Bidenomics is crushing us.
I can't keep up with the rising cost of everything.
This country is on the wrong track.
We can do better, but we must focus on solving the issues that matter most. With new leadership and fresh ideas, we can reignite the American.
So, talk to me, Paul. What do you think about that ad? And do you think it's going to get the candidates' attention to focus on economic issues tonight?
Well, I hope it gets the voters' attention. Ultimately, that's the goal of the ad, right? I mean, look, whether or not you're making America great again or building back better, ultimately, one of the things that ad is trying to do, and one of the things that I think the American people want is a forward-looking vision, an optimistic vision for where America can go, what we can achieve, and ultimately that's what I'm going to be looking for when the candidates get on the stage tonight and start to lay out their economic agendas at the Reagan Library.
Now, Stuart Varney is with Fox Business. Dana Perino is with Fox, and then they've got someone from Univision who I do not know on the set with them. But if I'm a moderator, I'm asking national security questions because I think economic questions, while generally relevant, are very hard to frame. At 30,000 feet, how would you frame your query, Paul, if you were asking these candidates tonight to comment on the state of the economy?
Well, I think that the national security issue is also an economic issue, right? So since the beginning of the pandemic, debt has gone up by about 44%, 48%. If you're looking at just the public debt alone, that's $8.3 trillion. The interest rates on long-term debt are now as high as they've been since 2007, when the debt was only $5 trillion. Now the total debt is about $33 trillion. Ultimately, that puts us on a much lower national security standing than we could otherwise be. But the other thing that we need to be thinking about here when we're evaluating these candidates' plans is that we know that there is a fiscal cliff on the horizon that's coming in 2025 and 2026 with the expiration of the individual side of the 2017 tax bill, as well as some COVID-era policies that could ultimately add another $3.5 to $5 trillion to the national debt, which ultimately will make us all poorer. In part because as we're seeing right now with the Federal Reserve having a hard enough time already restraining the growth of inflation because of all of the spending and debt that has been taken out since 2020. So ultimately, national security and economic questions.
Up, Paul, did you go away? Did we lose his feed? He froze. He froze, and we can still. There he is. You're back, Paul.
Sorry,
I want to ask you what. That's okay. I want to ask you about Lena Khan because if I were on the stage tonight, I would say, is it appropriate for Team Biden to turn the entire economy into a mad scientist for law professor's laboratory? What did you think of that yesterday? Because it cost every American who lives on a pension a lot of money.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, Lena Khan, look, it has demonstrated that she is a hostile actor. I mean, look, the FTC went from being one of the best places to work in government to one of the worst places to work in government. So her own employees are telling her that it's not going well, right? And we should listen, right? If they're saying it, if the left-leaning bureaucracy is saying it, then maybe we should take a step back and reconsider this. But look, I mean, the FTC is at the tip of the spear of the weaponization of government. And ultimately, if there's a new Republican administration in the future, one would hope that they would start to rein some of that back in.
And Paul, would you pose to the candidates tonight any questions about the administrative state? Because I think that captures in 2 words, the administrative state, 3 words, the administrative state, the problem with our economy, which is we are having creeping centralization of every sector of the economy in the Beltway. And that cannot be good for economic vitality and prosperity, because that's just classic economics. And that has not changed from the beginning of time. More government equals less productivity.
Right. Well, look, I mean, it comes down to a philosophical difference from where Biden is with where the other candidates are, right? I mean, Biden, in his own economic report of the president earlier this year, said that the root of all wealth creation in America is the government, and what the private sector can do is help the government redistribute that wealth once it's already been created, right? So that's what that's the position of the current president of the United States. And so if your philosophical leaning is such that the government creates the wealth, then of course you need a bunch of employees at the federal government to help you create said wealth, right? But you're exactly right. I mean, a positive, opportunistic economic message that I think the American people would respond to is one that trusts the American public, right? That believes in our creativity and the successes that we've had in the past, and knows that we can have even greater successes in the future. And that's just not where the current president is, but it seems to be where some of the candidates are moving.
Americans for Prosperity is a sponsor of our show. So I know this stuff cold, what they believe, and I want people who want to be involved in good economics to go to americansforprosperity.org. Paul, I've got a degree of difficulty question for you. Could a candidate put into the 1 minute they are allocated an explanation of why private investment is preferable to public investment? For example, the CHIPS Act, widely supported because it's a lot of money to sprinkle over the United States, but it is not preferable in my book to private investment locating semiconductor manufacturing in the United States for all the reasons that it might normally go there. How do you put that into 1 minute? Because that's all they get, 1 minute, public versus private investment.
So I would say 2 things. The first thing is that when people put up their private dollars rather than public dollars, they provide oversight, right? They provide oversight over those funds and make sure that they're actually going to their highest use. So we're going to get more growth out of those kinds of opportunities. The second thing that I would point out is that when you've been running debt at the levels that we've been running debt, and the labor market has essentially no slack, it has completely recovered since the beginning of the pandemic. That means that every dollar that Joe Biden is spending on manufacturing construction is taking away another dollar from elsewhere in the economy. And that's why you see private fixed investment actually falling since the enactment of the Build Back Better bill at the beginning of 2021.
You also get 1 minute to tell people how any presidential candidate, could actually control inflation. I'm a monetarist. I don't think fiscal policy has anything to do with inflation except that it does raise debt. But what do you think? And what would a candidate say?
Well, I'm with you, Hugh. I'm also a monetarist, and I think that the Federal Reserve is central to this question, and the independent Fed is central to this question. And so ultimately, I think that one of the things that the president can and should do at the beginning is take a hard look at what the Fed has done. And, honestly, it was too slow to act. It was too moderate at the beginning of their tightening. And I would pull Jerome Powell aside and say, look, we need a leadership change at the Fed. You can stay on the Fed. You've been appointed for a fixed term, but we need a leadership change over there. And I put somebody else in there who understood the issues and could get it back under control. That said, I think that there's also a lot that can be done to lessen the pressure that's put on the Fed, and that starts with restraining spending. You've got to get spending under control, and that you've got to go all the way back to the major mandatory programs. I hate to say it, but Medicare, Medicaid are big issues, and we need to start.
Paul, count me as fainting if anyone brings up entitlements on the stage tonight. I will faint if anyone says, "Let's cut the entitlements." I will just say, "Oh my God, what happened?" Paul Winfree, Center for Economic Innovation. Thank you, my friends. AmericansForProsperity.org. Go and join it. Become part of the movement to restore free market principles in America's government and in its electoral process and among its media. AmericansForProsperity.org. I'll be right back, Americans. Stay tuned to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Thank you, Paul Winfree.